Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much to Lee and Lolly, Kate, and Larry for a really interesting panel discussion on the issue of housing. It's such an important issue and challenge from an equity perspective. We know that the data shows that the zip code that you live in for a child determines their life expectancy and their earning potential. And so housing is just such an incredibly important issue for us to address systemic inequity in our society today. And so I learned a lot from your discussion there, and I'm hoping that the audience did as well. But you're right. So now's the time. Thankfully, this is a community celebration this afternoon, and now's the time for the community to be able to chime in, provide comments and feedback and discussion or anecdotes about the life of Earl Dickerson and what that means to you and what we've talked about today. So I think I'd like to actually start the discussion by actually quoting from some of his work, a piece that I just find really poignant in light of what's going on today. So when Dickerson, way back in the day, Dickerson actually contributed a chapter to a book called An Appeal to the World, which was a book that was published by the NAACP, and it was edited by W.E.B. Du Bois. Thank you. I can get that out. In my view, Dickerson's chapter, it's the second chapter in the book, and it's called The Denial of Legal Rights of American Negroes from 1787 to 1914. And to me, this chapter, it reads like a primer for those who seek to understand the historical underpinnings of the systemic inequities people of color continue to endure in American life today across a variety of fronts. And in this chapter, Dickerson writes, and I'm quoting now, "It is a sad commentary on American constitutional jurisprudence that because of the absence of effective sanctions, there exists a pitiable chasm between the doctrinal idealism of constitutional guarantees and the practical realization of constitutional protection. And in no phase of American life is this paradox more patently illustrated than in the status of American Negroes." Now, as we convene here today, at the close of a week during which it seems like the constitutional right for some of us to be free to have freedom of life, life and liberty, it continues to remain elusive for many people of color. And in these moments, it could be very easy to become disillusioned. But hopefully, by looking back at Dickerson's both his accomplishments and his legal scholarship, hopefully doing that will inform us and inspire us to continue to push forward. And as Valerie Jarrett said this morning, one of the big themes that I take away from his life and his legacy is this concept of resilience and the idea that change absolutely requires sustained effort, of course. But the other thing is the optimism with which he approached these problems. He really believed that change was possible if you put in the work. And so I'd like to just throw that out to the participants on the panels and the audience today, and to see what your reflections are from the discussions that we've had thus far. So if you'd like to throw in some comments, I'm going to monitor the chat, or else you can raise your hand. So let's see what questions or comments that we might have.
I think the presentations were really helpful and meaningful. These are very challenging times. It's remarkable. I mean, I said that if Earl B. Dickerson was alive today, he would probably first be stunned by what we see going on, and then he'd get to work. So I think that's important, and I think there are ways to do it. But to quote the great bebop jazz saxophonist Charlie Parker, now is the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And the other thing that think was really interesting, and I think Steve Brown, Mr. Dickerson's grandson, used this to describe him, which was his ideas, the mosaic life that he led. He was an activist on so many different fronts, and I found that particularly inspiring. Um, in that you can approach, if you even if you're not a lawyer, you don't have to be a lawyer to be an activist, right? You can approach things in from various fronts. And so that was another thing that I took away from today.
Usually being a lawyer means you're not an activist. I mean, that's in part what made Earl B so special.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have anything that they'd like to share or comment on?
I don't want to do too much talking because I'll be offering just a very few words at the end of the conference. But I did want to reflect on something in the conversation between Richard McAdams and Ron O.J. Parson about A Raisin in the Sun. Um, the Ron talked about the challenge of living in a cramped space that was raised by Richard, and it occurred to me the metaphor that I guess I just hadn't captured before, that the cramped space. Um, I think one way to interpret it is the Black Belt in Chicago. It wasn't just the family's house, but it was the fact that, and I think this relates to the fair housing and residential segregation conversation that we just heard. Um, the hemming in of populations of color in Chicago in terms of living space, and I was really struck by Richard's comment. How everything has to be negotiated in such a cramped space, and I think that ties into what we heard um, uh, about Earl Dickerson's own life, having fought every year of his life in every aspect of his life against such strong headwinds. Just the need to negotiate um, everything, and I think that um, one of the things that impresses me so much about his career is the fact that although he worked so hard to achieve sometimes what were incremental changes. I think Hansberry versus Lee is an example of that. It wasn't because he lacked optimism about the future, or that uh, that he sought radical transformation of our society. Rather, it's that he understood the need to uh, to persevere against the headwinds, and ultimately achieve what he could, leaving, of course, more work to be done for the generations that would follow. And I just loved Ron Parsons' comment about, in that home, in the Raisin in the Sun, the need for love and perseverance. And I think maybe if that's a mantra, if there's a mantra to take away from the reflections on Earl Dickerson's own life and what his legacy is for us, I think maybe those are the words that I'm going to keep in my heart, are love and perseverance.
Thank you, William. I think that those are lovely themes to take away. And what I think is so wonderful about having him being connected to our law school is that we have this legacy that's part of our life here. And I think it is very much inspiring to the students that we are training to become lawyers, to have that connected to the school, and to have his legacy be part of our educational experience here through the programming that we offer, the fact that we have our Balsa chapter named after him, that we have fellowships named after him. His legacy lives here, and we can be really, really proud of that. And hopefully we can honor those themes that you talked about, love and perseverance, in the way that we operate here as a university and as the law school. So I'm really excited to have this connection. And it's interesting when Steve was talking, his grandson was talking about some things he knew about his granddad, um, as he was growing up. But other things that he didn't learn until, later in life. I had the same experience with my own father, who was, very much active in civil rights, more on the side of education and desegregation. Um, and I remember, growing up, I kind of knew what he did, but I didn't really learn about the impact of it all until, like, literally his retirement party. Um, and so I'm so glad that, we're all in a position now that we can learn about this legacy and be able to benefit from his life and legacy, and the things that he did, and the tactics that he left us with. Because as Steve Brown said, he left the rest of us with a template, right? And so I think that's just a wonderful gift that we have, and that we can take forward with these themes from today. Is there anybody else that wants to comment before I pass the baton on to the dean to take us to the next part of our program?
I can say something.
Terrific.
So I do think the love and perseverance are the more important part of the story. But Steve Brown said something about his intellect, his staggering intellect. I just wanted to comment on that. This is a man who was born in rural Mississippi in the 1890s, and two or three of his grandparents were enslaved. When he volunteered for service in World War I, he wound up working as a translator in part because his French was so good that he could do that. And he goes on to found all the a fraternity in college, and an American Legion post in Chicago when he returns from the war. And that's just the beginning of a long career of doing all these things in business, in politics, in law, and it's the accumulation of all these things together that reflect not only his brilliance, but this perseverance or tenacity, as it was said, and that is it's so fortunate, I think, for the University of Chicago Law School to be associated with Earl Dickerson, and later in life, he was proud of his law school, and gave money to create a scholarship program because he thought that the law school had done something special for him, and so it makes me proud to be part of a law school that is associated with Earl Dickerson.
Absolutely. Thank you, Richard. And I think, Judy, did you have something that you'd like to read?
Yes, I did. This has been
Sure.
such a thrill listening to these stories, and hearing about granddad from my, I'm 53 years old, and he died when I was 18. And so many times when he would share stories, I zoned out and I didn't pay attention. One memory that I do recall, I loved going to the Ebony Fashion Fair with him when it was at McCormick Place. And I just couldn't wait to see the dresses, and it was so fun for me. And he always sat on the end. And I remember that I would be waiting and anxious for the lights to go down, but there would always be a line of people waiting to come and say hi to granddad, to thank him, or whatever that they were saying. But the line and I would just wait and not really pay attention. But as I got older, I would have that memory, and just kind of how remarkable that they would line up to speak to him and to thank him. I do have a graduation card that he wrote me that I thought kind of ties all this together. And if you would allow me to read it, he had horrible handwriting, and had I known, I would have maybe printed it out. But if you could bear with me, it's moving, and it still moves me to this day. June 12th, 1986. To my darling granddaughter, Judith Celia Cohen, I am more than happy to congratulate you as you graduate this day from the University of Chicago Lab School. As I sit here in attendance on this auspicious occasion, I think of the year June 15th, 1907, when I entered the lab school. It was there on the confines on the campus of the University of Chicago that summer when my world began. The inspiration that started my life in the quest of an education, though for financial reasons, I could not remain, the spark that lit my fuse never ceased to burn. And 2 years later, June 14th, 1909, I finished, and I can't read that word, at the school of the Northwestern University Evanston Academy. But your older brother Stevie did precede you in 1975, and as a product of the lab school. So now I welcome you as a graduate of the lab school. Forever take your place to the end of your career. Enjoy these golden days of your life in the traditions and history of the great university. As you enter Grinnell College in August, be assured your granddad, his heirs, and trustees stand by you financially and otherwise. Devotedly, Earl Dickerson.
Wow. That's lovely, Judy. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. How wonderful. Terrific. And Stephen, did you want to say something?
I'll be very brief. I just wanted to say thank you to the University of Chicago Law School. This has been fantastic. A lot of people put a lot of work into this, and we're very, very, very appreciative. And it's a great relationship, U of C and Earl Dickerson. He would be very, very proud, very thankful, and very optimistic.
Well, thank you.
Carry on. You're doing great work, and thank you to all the folks who I don't even know all the names of the people that worked on it from the U of C Law School, but thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's just been a pleasure, and I know I speak for Richard and William, that it's just been just a delight to work on this project and to see it come to fruition. We were just ecstatic and thrilled that we were able to arrange today's event and not have to postpone it any further. Although obviously we really would have preferred to have been able to be together in person, but we think we our priority was to make sure we had an opportunity to come together to make this celebration. So thank you for supporting that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dean Miles. Dean Miles has a very special announcement to make, so I encourage you all, please stick around because it's going to be really exciting. So with that, Dean Miles.